Okay, so to get started with jelly printing, you're going to need 2 sheets of good paper. When you come up to the jelly printing station, you'll have a tray that it is on, possibly a placemat. I have my jelly plate that is actually on a piece of thin plastic or plexiglass, depending on your jelly plate, and I tape that down so it doesn't move around, okay? And you'll also see that there's always going to be a really thin plastic on top of your jelly plate. So remember that the jelly plates are soft and squishy like a gelatin, like Jello. So please do not pick them up. We want them to stay in their space here, and leave the plastic on until you're ready to print to keep it safe. So to get started, we'll need a brayer, we'll need some more tape. Masking tape is fine, painter's tape is fine. We'll need wet wipes, and you'll need some small bottles of paint. What we begin with is setting up our paper for registration. Take your good piece of paper, place it on top of the covered clean jelly plate and line it up. Make sure it seems like it is straight and somewhat centered. And then what I do is I take a small piece of tape, maybe about 3 inches or so long, right around there is great. Rip that. And while holding this flat down, I tape one side of my paper to my placemat or my board. So I'm just going to keep this flat, and I'm going to have half of the tape on the paper and half of the tape on the table, board, tray, whatever's here. And the reason we do that is to create a hinge. So now when I flip this way and flatten that out, I'll be rolling paint on my jelly plate here and then flipping my paper to print it, and then opening it up, rolling more paint, flipping it to print. So we are always registered here, which means we're always lined up so that this jelly plate is always printing in the same spot on our paper. We'll also have a second piece of paper, loose, does not need to be taped down, on the other side. So now we are ready to get started. So remove that plastic protective sheet carefully, making sure again the jelly plate stays down. If you have sharp fingernails, long nails, anything like that, or jewelry on your hands, just be very careful. Again, we don't want to make cracks or holes inside of the jelly plate. I'm just going to put this aside here. And now I need my brayer. I'm ready to start. So to begin, you're going to pick some colors and put a little bit of paint on the jelly plate. You don't need a ton. So I like to shake them, pop the top open, and make sure there's no little hard crusties. Sometimes when you open them, they splatter or you get hard crusties. And I'm just going to start with a little bit of color on here. Not too much. Now remember, some paints might come out really, really thick. Others might come pouring out like total liquid. So go slow at first. You can always add more paint, but if you have too much paint, you might have a problem. When there's too much paint on the jelly plate, I find that when I'm about to roll this out, that instead of rolling, the brayer is supposed to spin. Instead of spinning and rolling, it just slides when there's too much paint on the surface and like shovels the paint off onto the table. So just make sure there's not too much. Sometimes if I feel like there might be too much, when I first start rolling this out, I might just sort of press and just make sure it's not going anywhere first. So then we're going to use this brayer and roll the paint across the jelly plate entirely. And you can continue mixing it if you want. Mix it as little or as much as you want, whatever looks interesting to you. But you want it to be somewhat flat, not too gloppy. And when you're ready, I'm going to clean the brayer off by rolling it onto my scrap paper. So this is why I have this piece here. So the brayer is going to be reused for printing all different colors. Rather than having to wipe it or wash it in between every color, I can just roll the excess off onto a piece of paper and keep reusing this piece of paper. Even if I have globs on the side of the brayer, I can just sort of swipe that off too if it's in the way. But we'll be mixing lots of colors, so we probably won't notice a little drop on here. Now I'm ready to print. So I'm going to take my hinged taped piece here and just very carefully flip this flat on top and press down. And then after I press it down to make sure it's stuck there, I just burnish. And remember, burnishing is just like a massage. I'm just rubbing with my fingers and sometimes with the heel of my hand here on the other part. And I sort of make sure I feel all the way the edge of my jelly plate so I know I'm getting the surface printed entirely. And then I'm going to very carefully start to peel back, and I'll see that my paint printed onto my paper right there. Now, again, I have a lot of paint still on my jelly plate, so I'll grab that scrap paper and use it as a pickup to make a ghost print. So you could also use multiple pieces of paper if you wanted to. I've also seen people hinge 2 pieces of paper here and do ghost prints while just using scrap for the brayer. There's a lot of ways you can do that as well, but I'm just going to use my scrap in this case for my ghost prints and just make some cool painted paper I could use for something else later. So that takes off a lot of that paint, and if I want to, I could even aim for some more and just sort of lift. Just get as much off as you can. Does not have to be every little ounce.
So I've already made a monotype. I have this monotype here
that I just made with the yellow and that sort of phthalo green kind of color. And I could be done there. That would be a wonderful place to stop and just have a beautiful background for something, or just an interesting monotype, or I could use it for collaging. There's a lot of uses just for this, but I could also do another layer. So why don't I do another quick layer to show you what that might look like. I'm feeling like this darker green area, there's a lot of green here, so I might want to break this up. I don't think I want to cover everything because I really enjoy the mixing of yellow and green here. So I sort of want to aim for right in here with what I'm going to put down on my jelly plate. So I'm not going to cover my whole jelly plate this time. But what you can notice, you have to pay attention to, is that this printed in reverse. Whenever you're printing a stamp or a print of any kind like this, where you're putting paper down and lifting it, it prints a mirror image. So this dark green side is on the left of my paper. That's actually on the right of my jelly plate. So I'm going to put some paint there. But I don't want to cover up everything I just did. So I'm not covering my entire jelly plate at this point. And I'm going to clean this off here on my scrap. And if I even think maybe this is too much, I could, in theory, draw into this with something smooth and soft. Again, we don't want anything to scratch, but I could make some interesting lines with a popsicle stick, for example, for this particular monotype, just for fun. See what that does. So now I'm ready to flip my paper. Here we go. Line it up again, press it down again. Now the paper might feel a little wet at this point, so you want to try to iron it flat while you do this and burnish. Nice. So now you're going to see the transfer of some of your paint on your paper back onto the jelly plate, most likely, because this was still damp. But we got this interesting transfer of that pinkish magenta color with those squiggly lines as you wrote onto that green side there. So now we have an interesting monotype. We can do as many layers as we want, but let's start cleaning up so we know how to do that. I'm going to print that ghost print onto my scrap here so I can lift off some more of the paint first. This makes our cleanup a lot easier, and again, it creates some interesting papers that we can play with later. So even that is quite lovely. So I'm going to aim for some more over here, I think, where we're missing some love. There we go. Next, I'm going to grab a wet wipe, and I'm going to clean my jelly plate and my brayer with the wet wipe. I could even clean off my tray if there is a tray under you. Now, if you do not have wet wipes, or we run out of wet wipes, you can also use a soft paper towel and some water. Okay, so sometimes we'll keep a spray bottle at our jelly station or nearby handy just in case we run out of wipes. And that's another way you can clean up. Okay, now just clean up the plate itself as best you can for the next person to use it. Clean the edges if you can, but I would not want you to pick this up. So try not to lift this off of its spot. If you get paint under the jelly plate, don't worry about it. I will take care of it later. I'd rather just leave it where it is for now so that we can continue working. The next person can go. And I'm going to use the wipe on my brayer as well. And we might get some staining on the brayer, but as long as there's no wet paint on it and it is clean, that is okay. Don't worry about the stains. They do not affect how it works. We just don't want any clumps of paint left on it. So it's clean for the next person to use or for the end of the day. Carefully untape your work. Carefully take the tape off the back of your work. Go nice and slowly and try not to rip your paper and try not to put your hand in your wet paint. Okay, here we go. Now, if somebody else is using the Gelli plate right after you, you can just step aside to write your name and put everything away. If you're the last person to use the Gelli plate for the day, please cover that back up again with your plastic that I had left on there for you. You're going to take a pencil and write your name on the bottom right of your print and put that on the drying rack. Also write your name on your scrap, on the paper that we used to pick up and do ghost prints from, and put that on the drying rack as well. Have fun!